A mysterious mom. What is your name?
22
I'm
and
not talking to
21.
anybody. I haven't done anything.
And a child at risk.
Is your daughter okay? Is there anything we can help with?
This week on Open Record, a real-life thriller
Sometimes everything's not the way that it seems.
that started with a FOX6 investigation. From the Fox 6 studios, this is Open Record. I'm Brian Polson, and I am joined by Open Record's executive producer, Sarah Smith. Hello, Sarah.
Hi.
And we are joined by Contact 6's Jenna Sachs. Welcome back, Jenna.
Oh, thank you.
We are recording this episode on Wednesday, July 10th, for release on Thursday, July 11th. We are days away from the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, and next week, Open Record will be live at the RNC for 4 consecutive days. Jenna, you and I are going to have a lot of work to do out there.
Yep. I thought you were going to say we're going to have a lot of fun out there. Nope.
I don't know, maybe that, but we have a lot of work to do.
Yes.
Monday, July 15th through Thursday, July 18th, you can watch Jenna and I streaming live on Fox Local and wherever else the stream goes, right? What is that? On the Fox 6, or fox6now.com, all that sort of thing. Yeah. But it will be live, and of course, it'll be there recorded afterwards for you to watch. We're going to be in the heart of the hard security zone station just outside Fiserv Forum in the Deer District. But again, that's next week. This week, we have a new Fox 6 investigation to talk about, and this is a wild one. It involves a mystery babysitter, a sketchy fundraiser, and allegations of animal neglect and child abuse. That's a lot, I know, bear with us. But it all started with a Fox 6 investigation 4 years ago, and we're going to talk about that when we come right back.
Brian's story this week focused on a Sheboygan mom who is charged with animal neglect and child abuse. It has some real twists and turns, but it all goes back to a Fox 6 investigation in 2020. Brian, can you tell us about your first report?
You know, this is one where I have all these notes, and I want to make sure. Sometimes we do these, and I sort of go out of order with things. But I thought the most important place to start here is going back to 2020, because we first came across this. I called her a mystery or mysterious babysitter. 4 years ago, I started getting calls and emails from concerned parents. 2 of them had children going to a Waukesha, like an in-home daycare. This wasn't like a daycare facility. This is a person who's watching kids at home. And then another person who had interviewed to send their child or children to this daycare. And each of them independently raised the same concern. They said, this babysitter seems like she's really nice and has a nice home. She seems to care for the kids. But there's some real questions about sort of who she is, because she gave the name. She said her name was Gabriella Dawn Anderson, and they had no reason not to believe that. Yeah. But one of the people who came to me at the time said, it was a father who was interviewing, said she told him multiple times, I have a master's degree. I have a master's degree in education. And he said, that's great. But she kept telling him that. And he thought that was a little suspicious. But what really piqued his interest and suspicion was when she introduced her little girl. And she said, this is my daughter, Gabriella Dawn. And he said, well, wait a minute, isn't that your name? Right. And while it's commonplace for men to have a child who are named after them, it is not as common for a mother to have a daughter named the same. So he raised that question, and he said her answer didn't make a lot of sense and seemed defensive. He asked for certain things from her. He wanted to see proof of certain things that she said. The more he asked, she said, maybe this isn't going to be a good fit. And he got really concerned that I think something's going on here. So he reached out to us. I think some of the parents started talking as well. And they said, we're not sure that this woman is who she says she is. Yeah. And obviously, your mom's. I mean,
right. Well,
how would you feel sending your child somewhere where you're not sure that person is who they're telling you they are?
Well, you feel like you should at least know who their name. Right. Sometimes I have to look in my phone, like, what is Lily's mom's last name?
Yes. Yeah.
Like I know her as, so-and-so Lily's mom, but sometimes you want the full name, especially if you're relying on this person.
Them for childcare.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I just think it's one of those things where, we talk about contractors that, end up not coming to, so you pay this money and you're like, okay, I'm out the money. It's no problem. This is your child, and you need to trust the people that you're leaving your children with. So if something kind of sends your spidey sense, skyrocketing, that's not great.
Well, and this one father who had reached out to me, one of the things he did is they were communicating by text. So he had the foresight to just do a Google search on her phone number, and up came a different name, Dawn Kaminsky. And he asked her, who's Dawn Kaminsky? And she said, oh gosh, that must have been somebody else who used to have this phone. And that didn't really make a lot of sense to him either. And as I said, the more he pressed, she said, I think maybe this just isn't going to work out. These other parents who were going there, sending their kids there, by the way, I want to point out, they said that they thought their kids were happy at this daycare. They were not concerned about the care that the kids were receiving, but they also started to have questions about her identity. And I can't recall, this is 4 years ago now, the order in which all of this happened, but they come to find out that Dawn, which is her first name, not Gabriella, was running a daycare with too many kids. In Wisconsin, and you've probably done some coverage of this.
You need to be
Jenna,
licensed if you have a certain number of
kids. If you have more than 3 kids who are not related to you in your home, then you have to be a licensed daycare. Some of these parents said that they believe she had as many as 8 to 10 children there on any given day. She would need to be licensed. So the state of Wisconsin actually gets wind of this. They put down an order and say you need to cease running this illegal daycare operation with all these people.
Was this after your story?
This was before. This
Okay.
was actually before the story. So these parents find out about that. That's where the ones who were going to the daycare now come to me and say, she's running an illegal daycare. We're not sure about her identity. And can you look into this? I already know now. I've been contacted by this other parent who says, well, she was still advertising. I just went to her to see about sending my kid there and got suspicious. So if she was told to shut down, a couple of months ago,
She's not.
She hasn't.
Right.
She's still seeking things. And that's when we decided, okay, she's still seeking new kids illegally. There's a question about her identity. So we got involved. And that's when we started to try to find out more.
What'd you find?
Well, during the course of our investigation, one of the really alarming things we found was, unrelated to all of this daycare stuff, she was arrested by Waukesha police. She had, in fact, gone to the hospital with her little girl. And people at the hospital thought she was being really hinky about her identity, about the child's date of birth. Some things weren't making sense. And they started to question her. And they said the more she said, the more it seemed like she was changing her story. And so they contacted police and got them involved. She was for about a half hour, denied certain things to police and eventually admitted her daughter's real date of birth and some other things. And she said at the time, she was doing that because she didn't have insurance. And she was acting that way because she was concerned they would find out she did not have insurance. I'm not sure how giving the wrong date of birth makes them think you do have insurance. I didn't really understand that one, but that was her explanation.
Did she get in trouble?
She was charged with obstruction because of lying to police. And this is all happening around the time that we're getting these calls from these other parents. So you know what I like to do, right? What am I going to do?
You're going to research and dig into it a little
Well,
bit.
not only that, I want to talk to the person. I want to go talk to
yeah,
Dawn.
That's right.
Like even before you
Dawn.
figured out her real name?
We still hadn't. Now, well, actually, that's a good question. I told you, sometimes it's the order I get confused
Yeah.
by. We do start researching, and I did some background research and find out that, remember the name Dawn Kaminsky? Well, we do a background research on Gabriella Dawn Anderson. We find out her real name is, in fact, Dawn Astudillo. And she has also been using the name Dawn Kaminsky, Dawn Kraft, Dawn Anderson in states all over the country. Now, it seems as though many of those names are due to previous marriages. She's been married multiple times, but she's been using those names off and on interchangeably out of order. And it's not as though, say you're Dawn Smith and then you get divorced and for a little while you use Smith until you become Dawn Jones and then you use that for a while. Yeah. She was using them interchangeably as though they were multiple identities. And that is what, and remember when the gentleman who called me asked her about Dawn Kaminsky, she didn't say, oh, that's my previous married name. She said, I don't know who that is.
Yeah.
They must have had my phone at some point in the past.
So you said you wanted to talk to her. Did she tell you why she was doing this?
Well, so we show up at her property and she's outside in the front yard and we went to go speak to her. And I believe... Or maybe we had knocked on her door first. I think we had knocked on her door first and she didn't come out. I can't recall the order of things, but what I do know is at some point she called police on us, concerned that there's a television camera and a news reporter outside her door. So Waukesha police roll up and she came outside and that's when I approached and said, can you just tell me what your real name is? And she said, my name is Dawn and I'm not telling you anything more than that. And she tells the police, hey, these guys are harassing me. We're on the sidewalk. The officer says, as long as he's there, he's fine. But then they started to have questions for her. Remember, this is the same police department that had already charged her with obstruction. So now they say, let's go inside and have a conversation. Well, they're wearing their body cameras And those cameras have microphones. We ended up getting the audio of the conversation that happens inside. And it's police are inside the house. They're asking her some questions about that little girl. And, how old is she? Why did you lie to the hospital? That's where she says, there was the insurance situation and she was scared. That day, there was some real question about, and I think this is what the parents were concerned about. Is this really her little girl? She's lying about her date of birth, which leads you to suspect perhaps she's hiding the child from someone. At least that was their concern. Police had that initial concern. We waited for hours as they dealt with whatever was going on, looked up some information. That day, Waukesha police left, satisfied that it was her child, satisfied that everything was okay, but informing her, you can't keep running this daycare with more than 3 unrelated kids. And we thought that was the end of the story.
Just kidding.
For 4 years,
Fast forward.
that was the end of the story. But fast forward to April of this year, nearly 4 years later, Dawn Astudillo's name resurfaces, and our 2020 investigation catches the attention of law enforcement in a whole different county. We're going to talk about that when we come back.
You report on the story on the mystery babysitter in 2020. Her name pops up again this year. What happened?
So I know nothing about where she is, where she's gone. I had gotten a couple of tips along the way after that first story, people who were concerned that she was continuing to see children in Waukesha. But I really didn't hear anything more. She, I think, pleaded guilty to the obstruction charge, a misdemeanor, and I don't even recall what the sentence was, but it might have been time served. I don't think she served any particular time in jail. But 4 years later, so earlier this year, I think it was early April of 2024, I get an email from a person who didn't want me to identify them publicly, but said that this person was a USA Today best-selling author, and that this author had been a member of an online book club that was dedicated to fans of psychological thriller fiction. And there were like 5,000 members of this group, many of them authors, some of them readers, and that Dawn, who we knew as Dawn Astudillo, Dawn was the admin of this group. She had created it and was one of a few people who were running that group. This author reached out because Dawn had recently posted a fundraiser in the group, a GoFundMe, saying, my daughter, the little girl we saw 4 years ago, my daughter is in a horrible situation. She's in the hospital. She needs help. I desperately need help. Can you please, donate some money to help pay medical bills? And in that initial, and I think I have it. I think I brought it out here. I'm going to read what this said. This is the original GoFundMe post that she put in the book club group. It says, my family and I are going through a horrific situation. My daughter's in the hospital. I need help to pay for everything she needs. My daughter was born 3 months early, so she has absent seizures. I don't know what that means. I think absent is probably a typo. The medicine is having an impact on her health. She stopped eating. They're running tests and lab work. There's a little broken English in here, but I'm reading it as I'm paraphrasing. Running tests and lab work to see what effect the medicine is having on her and why she stopped eating. I've started this GoFundMe because my daughter and I are in need of financial assistance due to some issues I'm not at liberty to discuss at the moment, but will be able to at some point. My daughter is in the hospital. I'm unable to be with her. And that becomes key to this story a little bit later on. So that seems to many of the people in the group to be like, gosh, we love Dawn.
She's got a sick kid.
She's got a sick kid. We want to help her.
Right.
And so many of these authors do. They send in $50, $100, $200, and she seems to be getting a lot of sort of a groundswell of support. But she keeps posting the GoFundMe day after day after day, saying, I need more money. I need more money. Can you please help? And at one point, she sort of plays on the writers in the group and says, be the plot twist in a little girl's story, appealing to these authors of psychological fiction. Hey, we can be that real life plot twist. After a while, some of these authors start to get a little bit suspicious that, well, she's really reaching out for money constantly. This doesn't feel quite right.
Well, and there was another name thing too, where online you can be any name you want to be.
Right.
So,
and that's really the key to how this comes back to Fox 6.
Yeah.
Because they knew her. All these authors in the group, all the readers in the group knew her under the pseudonym Dawn Angel. And it's not uncommon for authors themselves to
Have
use
different
fake names.
names.
Most of them
Sure.
don't use their real
Right.
name. So they weren't concerned that it wasn't her real name, but they're authors of psychological fiction, detective work, detective thrillers, things like that. So when they see a new name, the GoFundMe was listed under her real name, Dawn Astudillo. Well, they hadn't seen that name before. Naturally, what did they do?
Google.
What would you Google?
Go to the Google
They
box.
Googled her name. And they Googled her name. And what is one of the top hits in Google
Is
from
it your
4 years
story?
ago? It's a FOX6 investigation. And when they saw that, alarm bells
Red flags,
go
red
off.
flags. Yeah.
They're thinking this is sort of like the huge talk about plot twist,
Right,
right?
yeah.
This is not what we expected in this story. We thought Dawn was this great fan of psychological fiction. They always said, some of these authors I spoke to, and I spoke to 6 different authors throughout this process over the last couple of months, they said there were always some things about her that seemed a little odd. She didn't seem like, and this is their words, not mine, she didn't seem like she had a lot of money. One of them said, I figured she probably did this to get free books because authors will send new books
Sure.
to be proofed and
Yeah.
then
out
reviewed.
there
And she
and-
could say,
yeah.
hey, check this book out. And hopefully that helps them with sales. Well, that meant she was getting a lot of free books. Whatever it was, she seemed to be a great resource for them because they've got this Facebook group with 5,000 people, and there's a lot of these groups out there, and they're just trying to shop their stuff around. They're trying to make money. These are not the biggest name authors. Now, the one was a USA Today bestselling author. Many of these are small independent authors from around the world who are just trying to make a few sales.
Sure.
And they are not making a lot of money. So free advertising is free advertising.
Right.
But now they're concerned that maybe there's something concerning about this little girl and this persistent effort to raise money from someone who was the subject of this investigation in 2020. So we had the first person who reached out to me. I'll tell you guys what really stood out to me, though, and what got me involved and interested was 3 different authors reached out to me initially within a 2-day period,
Yeah.
completely independent.
Oh,
Not
that's-
knowing the-
that's never a
yeah.
good
They
sign.
didn't know,
Yeah.
and each of them said, I don't want my name to be used.
Right.
I don't want the other authors in the group to know, but I'm curious. I think you might want to look into this. And the fact that I got those independent communications suggested to me there's something really
Right.
to look into here.
So did they just call you or email you, or did they talk to law enforcement about some
Well,
of their
and I didn't know
concerns?
this for a while. As it turns out, the first one who contacted me also reached out to Sheboygan County Sheriff's Department. Now, you wonder, how did she know to do that? Because last we knew, Dawn Astudillo was in Waukesha.
Waukesha
Sure.
County, yeah.
As all of this is happening, and I'll tell you more about the timeline in a little bit, but as these authors are starting to get suspicious, police are already involved in looking at Dawn. One of these authors, the first one who contacted me, had been privately communicating with Dawn. She'd been sending text messages back and forth. And in those private messages, Dawn shared photos of a puppy she bought her little girl. And it's her first puppy. I don't know what to do. Do you know much about raising dogs? Well, this author was a dog lover, and it advised her on how to potty train, on what to feed, on the toys to get, even sent some toys to Dawn. Hey, maybe your daughter and the dog would love this. And so Dawn was gushing about how much she loved having a puppy, but then started to raise concerns about, well, but it's not going outside. How will it learn to go outside? Well, you have to potty train it. Well, how long will that take? And she starts to raise some concerns that this is maybe more work than she had anticipated. And at some point along the way, she tells that author, the dog's name, Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo died last night. This author is stunned. What do you mean? Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. This was your daughter's first puppy.
Right.
It was 6 weeks old just a few months ago, so this is only a few months old. What happened? And she tells the author, Dawn tells the author, that there was some sort of a genetic problem, and it was tragic and it was sad, and her daughter was heartbroken. Right about that same time, Dawn Astudillo ends up on public online website, CCAP, with a charge for animal neglect. And it's not clear to me how the author found out about that piece. It might be when she contacted law enforcement about the GoFundMe, she finds out that, we're already investigating her for this animal neglect situation. And she puts 2 and 2 together and goes, oh my gosh, the dog didn't die. The dog was found abandoned in a ditch, and it was incredibly malnourished. 16 pounds when it's supposed to be 35 to 40 pounds. They could see every rib and, bone in its spine and its body. This dog was in terrible shape, caked with urine and feces. The Humane Society found this animal in awful shape, and they realized they knew whose dog it was.
But she had come in. right?
That's why they knew.
Yeah.
2 months earlier, Dawn had come to the Humane Society to pick up the dog after it had gotten loose. And at the time, the dog was already a little bit small, but it wasn't in this horrible condition. But Dawn, they said, the Humane Society later told police she was acting really strangely. She was combative with staff. She gave information that was close to her name. She gave Kaminsky as a last name, but misspelled it, ended with an I instead of a Y. She gave the last 4 digits of her phone number were slightly off. Her address was slightly off. But what really caught their attention was the little girl standing behind her. They
Was
said
she in rough shape?
Well, that's part of it. But the first thing that caught their attention, and this wasn't in my story, you think about this, if you go to the Humane Society and there's dogs and cats all around, and there's a little kid who comes in,
Oh yeah,
what do they do?
They want to
They're
see
like
all the
magnets.
animals.
They want to see
Yeah.
the animals. They're excited. They
Yeah.
said this girl didn't seem interested in the animals. She didn't say a word. They said she looked disheveled, unhealthy, dirty matted hair, dirty clothes, and looked emaciated. They particularly noted she had deep bags under her eyes. And they remembered that 2 months later when they find this dog in a ditch, or someone brings the dog in and they go, that's the same woman who had the kid.
Who looked?
And I didn't realize this before
Concerning.
doing this story. Law enforcement says there's a strong connection between animal neglect and child neglect, animal abuse and child abuse. So they immediately call police because they're concerned it might not just be the dog that's been abused. It could be the little girl
So
too.
the timeline, though, okay, so that they came to the Humane Society in November of 23, right?
Initially, yes.
Okay, initially. So then were the authors that had reached out to you, was that more recent, or was that
so
kind of a?
Let me
okay.
straighten out the timeline because it really paints
Yeah.
a picture of what happened here. In November, Dawn's dog gets out and she goes in and she has this sort of experience that the staff members remember but don't do anything about at the time. They release the dog to her. She reluctantly pays the rabies vaccination. A couple of months later, someone finds another dog in a ditch. They realize upon investigation, this is the same animal from a couple of months ago, and it's badly deteriorated. And oh my gosh, that's the woman who had the little girl we were concerned about too. So they call police and they tell police, and police go, oh, it turns out there's already a CPS case on this same mother, Dawn Astudillo. So they contact Child Protective Services, and Child Protective Services pays Dawn a visit. And when they're there, they see the child for themselves, and they make note of it in their report that she has deeply sunken eyes and that she seems malnourished, that there are some things that just don't seem right. They don't do anything right away, but they start making more appointments
right.
with her. This is in February of this year. And over the next couple of months, they make more appointments with Dawn. But now Dawn starts coming up with reasons not to be at the appointments. And one of them is she says she's in March, she's snowed in the Dells and she can't make the appointment. Well, police say there had been snow overnight, but there wasn't very much.
Sure.
It had melted by early morning. And what they do, you guys know I've talked about flock cameras on this.
Oh, yeah.
They check. She says I was in the Dells. They check flock cameras from around the area and find out she was never in the Dells.
Oh, really?
In fact, she was in Ozaukee County. In fact, traveling back and forth between Milwaukee and Ozaukee counties. And they say she's not where she says she was going to be. So police now get I think actually Child Protective Services gets what they call a pickup order, where they can go and they can now get this child and take the child into custody because there's enough concern she's being mistreated.
Sure.
But they can't find her. She's not at home. She seems to be hiding out somewhere. Police now use cell phone data to pinpoint her location, and she and the child happen to be staying at a Brookfield hotel, the Country Inn and Suites on Moreland Road. And they find her there on March 28th.
Okay.
Now, remember, I said it was early April that the author started reaching out to me.
Yeah.
On March 28th, police come in and arrest Dawn, and CPS takes away the little girl. 4 days later, that is, I think. 4 days later, on the 2nd of April, she posts the GoFundMe.
Gotcha.
I need money desperately. My daughter's in the hospital. What she failed to mention was my daughter's in the hospital because there's an investigation for mistreatment or child abuse, and my child's been taken away. She didn't mention that. Remember, she said there's something I'm not at liberty to say.
Yeah.
She wasn't at liberty to say. She could have said it. She didn't want to say
Right.
that my child's been taken away because they say I've mistreated her. She made the authors in the group believe that, in fact, her child was just desperately sick.
Did they ever talk to her about that? Did they ever type a comment saying, hey, is this all on the up and up? Like, did they ever question her about any of this?
After that those posts. So remember, police are investigating. They've now arrested her. The authors in the group don't know this. They see the GoFundMe and initially go, "We want to help. We love Dawn. Let's help her out." And then they start to get suspicious that she keeps posting the GoFundMes, and they find my investigation. So police are already investigating Dawn. Then the authors find my investigation. One of them who reaches out to me contacts law enforcement and confronts Dawn. So she reaches out to Dawn and says, "What's up with this? You are being, the animal wasn't dead.
Right.
Animal was ditched. You did it. And your child, we're concerned about the child." So Dawn now has to come clean because she's afraid this author is going to tell everybody else in the group it's all been a big lie. So she goes back onto GoFundMe and she updates it. This is 6 days after the initial GoFundMe. And she says, "The truth is, in fact, I was arrested and my child's been taken by CPS and I need this money to get her back." So she initially makes it appear this is for medical expenses. Now she's admitting, because she has no choice, I really just need money for a lawyer.
And I imagine they weren't thrilled by that twist.
Well, that was what I wanted to find out. So I reached out to a number of these authors. What's really been fascinating to me through this process is how many have been defensive of Dawn. Not that they said so to me, but wouldn't respond. And then I saw posts in the group that were shared with me by some of those who had responded that other authors were not only not coming down on her, they were in fact going to greater lengths. This wasn't in my story on the air. They were doing auctions to raise more money for her after knowing all of the truth. They were going, still coming to bat for her. And I asked one of the authors who spoke to us about that, and he said, these groups are, first of all, Dawn's been a great resource. She's been, free advertising, and a lot of them don't want to burn the rest of the community. And if the overwhelming support seems to be behind her, they don't want to turn on her.
They don't want to be the one who says no. Yeah.
I can't say why. There were a lot of people. Only one would do an interview with me on camera, and even that one said, "I don't want you using my name, my face, or my voice. I want you to alter my voice." And the reason he said is, he said, groups like this, they can be vindictive. He said they're really supportive. They can also be vindictive, and he didn't want to become sort of the black sheep of the group. So there's still a lot of defense of Dawn in spite of all of these concerns that have been raised.
What about the criminal charges here? What is she facing exactly?
So she's charged, or she's arrested in April. When the authors reach out to me, there's still no charges. It's not until May that, in fact, she is now criminally charged. And by the way, investigators, as they're looking into the background, they find our story. And it ends up in a long criminal complaint. By the way, no offense to Sheboygan County DA's office. They are not fiction writers. They're nonfiction writers. This is a 21-page convoluted criminal complaint. It is long. It is out of sequence, but there's a lot of information in there.
Yeah.
And one of the sequences talks about how they're doing research and they find our investigation, which raises further concerns for them about her lying, her identity, the child's identity. There's one mention. They say, we're still not sure it's her daughter. And we don't know for sure if they've been able to prove that. They did take DNA from both the mom and the daughter. We don't yet know if they've gotten the results of that. But she was charged with 4 counts of animal neglect or mistreatment of animals, 2 counts of child abuse. Those are felonies. The animal ones are misdemeanors. 2 felony counts. And she was initially charged with fraud for the GoFundMe. But I think potentially or possibly because she indicated in there that there was initially some reason she wasn't at liberty to say and technically her daughter was in the hospital. It was just for a reason she didn't exactly clarify. The DA's office said, we're going to withdraw that charge. We don't think that one is appropriate right now. They've stuck to the animal neglect and child abuse charges, and she's being held on $50,000 bond in Sheboygan County. I know I want to take this one step further because, and let me go to this. So when we mentioned in 2020 that there were concerns about her child, and now here we are in 2024, there's concerns. The natural question is, does she have any other kids? Has this ever happened before? And the answer is yes. And we'll talk more about that when we come back. So Dawn Astudillo is charged with 2 felony counts of child neglect and 2 felony counts, or 4 misdemeanor counts of animal mistreatment. This is not the first time she's been charged with child abuse. It goes all the way. Now, Dawn is 53 years old. So her daughter, who is 9 years old, we now know, but she was telling everyone she was 8. That means she was in her 40s when she had this child. But back in 1991, when Dawn was 19 years old, she had another child, and that child in the state of Florida was found with bruises and lack of nutrition by local child welfare authorities there. She was convicted of child abuse. This is 33 33 years ago. Am I doing the math right on that?
Sure.
Something
Yes.
like 30,
Yes.
33 years ago, she was
I had to look
convicted
at
of
it.
child
Yes.
abuse in
Yeah.
Florida under the name Dawn Craft. And that raises the immediate question for me, and I imagine it probably did for authorities, is that why she's been going through all of this identity stuff, not using her real name? She doesn't want people to know if she's going to be a babysitter that
Right.
she has
That
a
she has a
past
history.
child abuse.
Well, and some people I
charge.
know also kind of will go back to a maiden name or a new name if they're trying to maybe escape a bad relationship or someone who they may feel threatened by. So you, like, to your point, you don't know. And you said she's had different names across several states. So
Well, and you bring up a point that we didn't talk about it in this story, but she has raised it publicly. She's raised it in letters to the court. Dawn says she is a victim of domestic violence, and that in fact she asked the court not to publish her current address in the case that is going on right now because she feared whoever was the instigator of this violence coming to find her. I do know I've spoken to her current husband, apparently still current husband, Ricardo Astudillo, who is looking for her. But Ricardo says that there's been no violence, certainly at least not recently, that they have, and she told me 4 years ago that in fact he had been coming to see the child regularly. So if it's Ricardo she's hiding from, he seems to know where she is. And the court did leave, if you look up CCAP, I hate to say it, her address is still in there. So the court's left her address in the public record. Whether they're not convinced by her what she's saying.
Allegations.
I don't believe there's been any conviction for domestic violence, but she's saying that that's the reason why. And that would make sense. If someone's trying to be a little hinky about their identity, about their child's age, because they're hiding from someone who they think could do them harm or might take the child away, that would add up. But so far, there have been other things she's done that haven't really fit that profile. That's certainly a question that's still out there. Is this simply a case of someone who is hiding from an abuser, or is this someone who's hiding from her past? And I think that's where the child abuse conviction really comes into play.
How many kids does she have in all?
Well, this was news to me when I saw the criminal complaint of the Sheboygan case that's pending right now, because investigators do more of a thorough background check, and they find that not only does she have the child from 1991 that was taken away, but with multiple fathers and in multiple states, she has had as many as 4 other children beyond the one in this current case. Yeah. So potentially a total of 6 children, if I've read the criminal complaint correctly, that she's had at some point or another, and all of them except the current one have been taken away. Well, now the current one is also in social services custody, but all of them have been taken away in other states by child welfare agencies that had concerns about the treatment of the children. And it does seem like malnourishment is a consistent theme. So is this someone who is a serial abuser? We don't know. She's only been convicted once. She's charged again, but she's had other children taken away. And authorities say when they asked her, how many children do you have? She said 1. She only acknowledges the current one, even though she's had as many as 6 children.
Yeah.
So the ones that have been taken away previously, she seems not to be acknowledging as her own children. I guess legally, in a sense, they aren't anymore. But that obviously raises real questions about the safety of this little girl after the outcome of this case.
Well, and what about the girl's father? Do we know anything about him? Have we heard from
Well,
him?
that's
he
Ricardo.
what,
That
Ricardo?
is Ricardo.
Okay.
Ricardo Astudillo is the girl's father.
Okay.
And because we've had questions raised and authorities raise questions, is this her girl or is this a kidnapping?
Yeah.
We don't know. Is that why she would be hiding her identity? Because it's not her child. Ricardo confirmed for me, yes, that's our daughter. She was born in Vermont. He sent me a birth certificate that seems to confirm that this is the child. It had a name that matched with what I knew to be the child's name. So it seems as though that's correct. That birth certificate confirms what law enforcement had said, that her date of birth appears to place her at 9 years old. What was really interesting is her date of birth is in November, but when police or CPS, I think it was a forensic investigator for the sheriff's department, asked the little girl, how old are you? When's your birthday? She gave a birthday that I believe was in maybe March or April. She didn't seem to know her own birthday.
Well, and didn't part of the complaint also talk about how her speech level or where she was at cognitively?
She's 9 years old.
Yeah.
They said her speech was that of a 4 or 5 year old
Right.
child. They said her teeth were extremely rotten. They said that she was, she's talked about playing with friends, but when they pressed further, they found that those may have been imaginary friends.
Sure.
One of them was an adult male from a previous address they had lived at who lived next door. So she considered that her friend. Ultimately, what they said was this is a little girl who'd been isolated. She hadn't gone to public school.
I was going to say, do we know if she was in school?
She was not enrolled in public school. She had been going to virtual schools, but every year seemed to go to a new one. And I don't know if that's because those schools began to raise questions. We know at least one saw her on camera and raised concerns about the sunken eyes and concerns that she wasn't getting equipment that was being sent home or supplies that were being sent home, that she didn't seem to have them. So they had raised concerns. So it may be why she kept changing schools as well. But it's not as though this was a little girl that a bunch of kids in the community would know, because she was isolated. At least according to the criminal complaint, she was isolated. She wasn't going to school.
Do we know if she's still doing childcare?
I don't know that, but I have had some people during the course of this investigation say they thought she'd been watching kids there. I haven't seen any evidence of that as to whether or not she was watching kids or whether she was still advertising. At least one person told me they thought that she had been advertising. She used to advertise on Craigslist. She might have been doing that again. I can't confirm that, but there's certainly concerns if that were still ongoing as to whether or not she were still engaging in illegal childcare. Can't say that that's the case. We know that was the case back in 2020.
Well, we talk about how we had a former boss here who always talked about how the internet is written in ink, and how, while your stories, and you mentioned this, I think in a Facebook post, how your stories and investigations, they go on the air and we air them. They may air 2 or 3 times. But the digital version of it live on a website, on our YouTube channel for a very long time. And so in the age of the internet now, entering in just a couple keywords can bring up a lot of results, search results. So innocent until proven guilty. However, I just think it's, none of this, the cascade of investigations and information wouldn't have ever happened had some of that stuff not been online.
I will say, I'll give credit to the sheriff's department that they were already doing their own investigation of the child abuse before they came across our story. But these authors who were donating all kinds of money, they wouldn't have known. And as you said, our story lives online. Years ago, we used to do so much of this work into a story that would air one time and it was gone. And if people didn't see it, that was it. I might be able to get a copy of it that I could mail to someone. That was about it.
Yes.
Now they live online and they don't go away. And that's one of the things I really love is our website has kept these stories alive for years.
Yeah.
And it does also mean we have to be careful with our reporting, because this stuff can haunt someone. If you search Dawn Astudillo, that story's up there. And if that story's wrong, it's incredibly unfair.
Yeah.
So we are very careful about making sure that what we put on the internet has been vetted, that it is accurate. And in this case, it lived out there, and it really helped a lot of these people in the group to identify that this is not someone we want to entrust our money to. And in fact, we may want to reach out to authorities to tell them what we know. And that has gone a long way toward these child abuse charges, because they have been able to give information that led to both some of the animal neglect charges or animal mistreatment charges and the child abuse charges.
You didn't show the little girl's face in your story. You blurred it.
Correct.
But even seeing some photographs that show her with her face blurred, it like pulls at your heart a little bit. She was holding a doll in a picture that my daughters have. And so that was just a moment that made me be like, oh, this is just a little girl who's going through who knows how much behind the camera. And I'm wondering if we know what's going to happen to her now.
No, that's really the unwritten chapter in this, right? Is this is a story that's still ongoing. Dawn Astudillo is in jail. She's being held on $50,000 bond. We know that the little girl is in the custody of the state of Wisconsin Social Services. She is somewhere else in the state. We don't know where. I don't know if that's in foster care, but she's being cared for. What will happen after the case? Obviously, if Dawn is found not guilty, there's a better chance that potentially she might be reunited with the child. If she's found guilty, maybe there's less of one. But really, that's not a decision for the criminal courts as much as it is a decision for social services as to if or when the family should be reunited. I know that throughout this process, Dawn has maintained, one of the last things in that 21-page criminal complaint is that Dawn said, I would never hurt my daughter. She has expressed love for her daughter, how important and special her daughter is to her throughout the process. She says that she gushes about her daughter to other people. What she says about the child stands in contrast to the condition that was described by medical professionals. But certainly her statements are she loves her, she wants to be with her. And the child has told authorities, She loves her mom. And so, but again, that doesn't mean that there wasn't abuse, and it doesn't mean that it's appropriate. It's not for us to decide. Obviously, it's for the people, the professionals, the experts to determine that. But the end of the story is not yet known.
Well, and she's in the middle of this.
She's in the middle of the process,
trial,
and obviously we're going to follow that to let our viewers, to let you all know how that outcome turns out. And I'm sure when that happens, we'll have another story. And we will go off the record when we come right back. All right, it's time for us to go off the record. This is the part of the podcast where we get a little more casual and have a little fun by answering a question for which we have done absolutely no preparation, unless your name is Sarah Smith.
That's me.
She has the question.
I do. Okay, today we're going to talk about traffic. No, not traffic. Not really, but driving.
Okay.
Okay, so I mean, maybe we can talk about how you feel about them too. We're talking about roundabouts.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. All right.
So I am a big proponent. I used to not be, but
love
I am a
roundabouts.
proponent now. I think they make traffic. But this is, whatever. Do you use a turn signal in a roundabout?
Do I use one?
Do you use one? So the roundabout has
No.
the 2 entrance lanes, and so you stay in that right lane, and then you need to turn off in that first.
Yeah. Oh,
Do you use one, or do you just
follow the curve.
follow the curve? And if you're yielding, you just have to wait and see.
I'm just going to put myself out there, and maybe I'm doing it wrong. I don't.
I don't either.
It's not
Okay.
a hard right or a hard left, and I'm just following the traffic pattern.
Right.
So I got in the right lane. I don't
Yes.
think I need to use the.
No, because it's
Well, I actually think that can be confusing if there are multiple exits, because then which one are you signaling
one?
you're coming out of?
Right.
And it's not particularly helpful to the driver behind you, I don't
Yeah.
think. You did mention, though, you said there's 2 lanes going in. There are different roundabouts. Some have a single lane going in. Those
Yeah.
are easy.
Yeah, yeah.
The multiple lane ones sometimes get confusing.
Have you ever got out the wrong way and you're like, no, or you want to get over it and you realize you entered the
I've
wrong.
had to go all the way around, and I was
Yep.
like, oh, I'm a dummy.
But see, that's what I love about roundabouts, is if you make a mistake, you
It's
just
okay.
keep going.
You get another shot.
Now, of course, it does anyone who, and this is probably going to be an old reference at this point, but anyone who's watched National Lampoon's European Vacation, that's immediately
A
what I go
real
to is,
hit.
hey kids, Big Ben, Parliament, and they
Yep.
keep going around, and he's like, I can't get left. But there's like, that has like, I don't know how many lanes.
Right.
That
Yeah,
roundabout
that
has.
one was big.
But 2, I know, gets a little more complicated. What drives me crazy is when people stop at one, but no one's in the circle because they're just
Yeah.
unsure what to do.
Yield doesn't always necessarily mean stop. Yes.
Yes, but overall, and I know that initially people were they hated
I
roundabouts.
was a reporter in Green Bay when they started getting
Yes.
all of those roundabouts when the
Yes.
state was replacing the exit ramps, and people were losing their minds over these roundabouts.
Yes.
They were airing commercials teaching people how to use them, and people were so many were just dead set against them. It was a contentious issue.
That's what I'm
at
saying.
the
Very
time.
polarizing.
It's almost like when that train leaves the station, then there's going to be people who go, I hate roundabouts. It's just a thing that they're trying to do to us. But
I just remember people going, "This isn't Europe. This is America,
right, yes.
and we make hard rights."
exactly, like it was unpatriotic to have a roundabout or something like that.
Yeah.
But what I love about them, because to me, the biggest pet peeve in traffic of all is sitting at a stoplight.
Four-ways. I was going to say
No one's
No one's
coming the other
coming.
way,
Oh,
and
I
I am
know.
just stuck there. And I go, this needs a roundabout so I can go.
Or the 4-way stop where you're like, you do the Midwest. No, you go.
No, you go.
No, you go. No, you go. And they're like, no, you go.
There's that like.
It's when you do a dance,
yeah, that.
and by the end, you're like,
And I
just
get
gonna
that
go.
roundabouts aren't appropriate everywhere. What I think drives people
Yeah.
the most crazy is when you've got that string of like 3 in a row.
Oh,
and it's like,
yeah,
you know, whatever.
yeah.
But up to me,
No, I
the
like
greatest thing in the world is the ability to go the other way without having to make like to go 2
complete-
blocks
yeah.
around or do a Y turn
Yep.
or something, or an immediate U-turn in a 2-lane area. I like just going around the roundabout. Sometimes I'll go around a couple of
for
times
fun.
just for fun.
When we were first getting those roundabouts in Green Bay, I was working with this photographer who did not like driving the live truck, and she got stuck on a roundabout.
Oh, no.
And you know, we're a big
it's a wide
advertisement
load, yeah.
for our station.
Yeah.
So it's just going in
and she
circles.
went around it 4 times
Hey.
with me in the passenger
That's a
seat being like,
commercial.
I'm so embarrassed right now.
Jenna puts on her sunglasses. Oh, gosh. Well, and I will say they put them in sometimes, too, for crash reduction or, you
Absolutely.
know, like
Yeah, right.
Because the
speed.
angle of impact
Yes,
is
yes.
not as dangerous.
So it doesn't mean there won't be crashes,
No.
but if they happen, they are less
Deadly.
Yes,
deadly.
yeah.
And I don't know, that's never been, I mean, I think that's a good reason. It's a great reason. It's not been why I like them. I
Right.
just like them for the convenience of it. And I don't have to sit at lights because I hate sitting at
Well,
lights.
they say it does speed up
Yes.
the process.
Yes.
Like,
'Cause there's
instead
constant
of the
flow.
waiting,
Right,
it's
yeah,
actually
right.
faster to just keep
But
going.
also that panic I feel for the 7 seconds right before I approach it, even though I know where I'm going.
Yeah, I know.
I'm like, okay, left lane straight. Okay, left lane, I can go straight. Okay, I can go all the way around. Like I have to like talk to myself
or
and
if it's
talk
a new
through it.
roundabout you haven't been through
Yes.
before.
I have wondered though, like other than having a driving billboard, how many times could I drive around a roundabout before someone notices? Because no one's watching.
No,
They're just
no
going
one's
on their
paying
way.
attention. I bet
could
you
I just drive around it all day
You know
and no one
what?
would have a clue?
I bet you could probably do it for a really long time.
All right. Well, we got to take a break and we're going to wrap things up when we come right back. All right, and that is going to wrap things up for this week on Open Record. If you have a topic you would like us to discuss on Open Record or an issue you think we should investigate for Fox 6 News, send us an email to fox6investigators@fox.com. As always, thank you to the people who make this podcast possible, including my co-hosts today, Sarah Smith, Jen Sachs,
Yes,
thank you
of
both.
course.
Our editor, Dave Machuda, who is manning the video switcher this week and has to edit all this stuff, but also our chief photographer, who's not here today, Kale Zimney. And with that, I'm Brian Polson. We'll be back next week.